So obviously that's Japan on the right-hand side, and that's the light pollution, I guess, over Tokyo, because that's centered right over the Kanto area, the plain where Tokyo is located. And I'm very close to there. I'm in Yokohama, which is part of sort of the Tokyo metropolitan area, which I don't know, actually. It's somewhere between 30 and 45 million people in this metropolitan area. I was saying earlier to someone, I think it's the most densely populated city in the world, but not the largest metropolitan area. Anyways, here's how I sort of organized my talk here today. Just a little bit more on a self-introduction, then to talk a little bit about Japan and how it's been shaped by history and culture and religion, and a little bit about their thinking here in Japan, because I think what you'll find is that sort of dovetails into sort of why maybe edge science kind of activities and ideas and concepts maybe have a little bit of greater acceptance here than other places in the Western world. And then I'll go into talking a little bit about the SSE Japan organization, which I stumbled across actually maybe about 5 years ago by reading the book by Bernard Heisch on the God theory. And that really just got me down the path to exploring SSE, and here I am today. And in 2018, I decided to start up a local organization. We'll talk about that. Okay. So, as Annalisa said, I've been here over 20 years in Japan, still an American citizen, but a permanent resident, which gives me all the rights that Japanese people have, except for I'm not able to vote. Wife and 2 children, all 3 of them essentially made in Japan. And my education was already mentioned, and my employment was already mentioned. So I spent most of my career in biotech, bioscience, large companies like Merck Millipore, Thermo Fisher, small companies like Reprocell, which is a small stem cell company here, and now Yokogawa, which is a huge engineering firm, but they're moving from sort of the chemical, or moving into sort of the biopharmaceutical area from the perspective of process control and automation. So they have a very small life science group that they're starting to build now, and I'm happy to be a part of that. So, major factors influencing Japan today. And here's just some bullet points that I thought were interesting, that I think are relevant to Japanese culture, philosophy, thinking. Of course, in history, for over 1,400 years, Japan was kind of in isolation, and they wanted it that way, and actively sought to keep it that way. So the amount of sort of cultural and ethnic homogeneity existed for over 1,400 years, and the feudal society lasted until the mid-1800s, when Commodore Perry came knocking on the door in Shimoda and said, "Hey, open up. We want to trade with you guys." It actually has the oldest continual hereditary monarchy in the world. That started in the 7th century. At that time, the capital of Japan was a place called Nara. Nara is just south of Kyoto. And by count, they think there's been about 126 emperors over the 1,000 and more years since then. And just a few years ago, there was a transition. One of the existing emperor at that time abdicated the throne to his son, basically. Culture and society. There's less than 3 million foreigners living in Japan, which is about 2.5% of the total population. So still, it's 97.5% Japanese people. I first came here in 1996, and it was a very interesting experience, because even back then, I still sort of got some, especially when you went to the countryside, kind of interest and curiosity in just being a foreigner and what are you doing here. Interestingly, Japanese diet was basically vegetarian for nearly 1,300 years, and it wasn't until the West sort of came here that introduced them to, you know, um, beef and meat and everything else. So it was largely fish and tofu and beans and rice, of course. Nowadays, the population in Japan, it's the eldest population of any country on earth, with over 1/3 at the age of 60 years old or older. I think the median age is around 47 years. So it's quite an elderly population here. Um, and this does not bode well for the future. It's a declining workforce, declining birth rates, declining marriage rates, declining population, and it's accelerating. So Japan has a very serious problem in the future with how to deal with this and the economy and to take care of their population. Now, religion has a very big impact on Japan's thinking and philosophy. And there's two basic religions in Japan, Shintoism and Buddhism. And Shintoism is uniquely Japanese religion, with basically a fundamental belief that sort of all things possess a spirit and deserve acknowledgement and respect. Even that rock on the ground there has a spirit. Evil results from evil spirits basically exerting evil influences. So this is about living in harmony with nature and the spirits of nature. And that coexists alongside with Buddhism, which was imported from Chinese culture. And this Buddhism is kind of like a philosophy for developing one's eternal spirit, possibly over multiple lifetimes. And my opinion is religion in Japan is fairly private, low pressure, guilt-free, and it's really more akin to a philosophy for living and not really a religion. I think this is quite different than sort of the usual practice of most traditional monotheistic world religions. I mean, Japanese people basically don't consider themselves as having a religion. No, I practice Shinto and Buddhism. I'm not religious, basically, is their response. Very rich history of sort of folklore and supernatural, and this sort of fits with sort of the concept of Shintoism. I don't know if you ever heard of these things called Yokai. Yokai are these folklore spirits of supernatural monsters or demons, and they have many other names. And there's hundreds of these sort of characters that are in Japanese literature historically. Similar and to Oni, which is a demon, essentially. So some of the yokai are actually demons, and demons are generally considered to be evil. But some yokai can actually be nice. Some of them are listed there on right, kappa. This kind of looks like a cross between a monkey and a turtle. They're mysterious and polite, but they could be malevolent. They lurk underwater, and they like to drown people to possess their soul. Maybe the one you've heard about before is that kyokotsu. This sort of forms from an improperly discarded bones of a suicide or a murder victim, and when someone unceremoniously buries or discards the body, it instills a grudge in the bones, and then that spirit basically can transfer its grudge, and it remains dormant until disturbed. And this is the person that was portrayed in the Japanese movie, The Ring. And then there's these other kinds of, many, many different kinds of yokai. I saw a podcast, or listened to a podcast a couple of months ago. And basically, there's this American guy, and this whole podcast is just about yokai. There's just so many to choose from that it just sort of illustrates this sort of rich folklore and belief in spirits and things. And I think that sort of ties into, now this is my opinion. Most of this is my opinion. I'm not a scholar in Japanese philosophy or history or anything, but I've been here for over 20 years. And I think in general, and maybe some of it is just due to the aging population, is that Japanese people hold strongly to traditions and old superstitions, and yokai is a good example. And there's lots of sort of silly things like my wife, being Japanese, often scolds me for whistling at night. You don't want to whistle at night because that calls the spirits into the house. Whistling during the day is okay, but don't do it at night. Japanese people believe in spirits and unseen world. They seem to be quite accepting because of this, I think, of influences or powers beyond sort of modern scientific understanding. And even their religion and their philosophy sort of incorporates this belief in the connective niche of nature and spirit. So I think what this results in is, in general, Japanese people are more accepting of non-mainstream sort of edge science concepts and ideas than, talking to Westerners or science people in the West. This is a book that I came across recently, Spirituality is a Way. I haven't got it yet, but why it caught my eye is because one of the authors is a guy named Carl Becker. And I met him actually, or I contacted him several months ago, and I saw this, and he wrote that Japanese spirituality as a way contrasts with Western spirituality that tends to be based on cognitive approach with a background of mind-body dualism. And didn't quite get that, so I sent him an email, and I think he kind of confirms what I said to you previously. And he is an expert on sort of this kind of stuff, philosophy and spirituality in Japan. And he wrote back, Japanese beliefs tend toward a monistic, materialistic mind-body continuum, allowing for invisible subtle matter and energy, but not treating them as a distinct, much less dualistically opposed essence. Our authors are not entirely consistent about this, and I tend to view this less as an explicit than a inchoately formulated monism, partly due to the ambiguity and vagueness of the Japanese language and thought. And that's very true, that Japanese language is not very specific. My own chapter stands apart from the others in treating spirituality from the viewpoint of Japan's rich history of parapsychological phenomena. Most of my co-authors center on work, nature, daily life, breathing, martial arts, in which spirituality is more a description of how gracefully or unconsciously something is performed, rather than of what essence underlies that consciousness. So I think he kind of confirmed with me that my experience and thinking on this topic is actually similar. So anyways, interesting book if available now. So I think that sort of sets the stage to say, well, okay, maybe EdgeScience organizations and activities and research in Japan are a bit more open or accepted and practiced. And so I tried to look into this a little bit more deeply. Now, to be honest, I may be familiar with one of these organizations, but I found a whole bunch, and I just wanted to outline them for you, but I don't really know that much about them. In fact, of course, in the last year, I haven't been able to reach out to anybody or to meet with any of these organizations other than the one. This organization, I think, is the most well-known, and this one I do have an affiliation with. I know Dr. Yamamoto quite well, and that's the International Society of Life Information Science, ISLI. So they publish a journal and symposiums twice yearly, pre-COVID. I mean, it's kind of been difficult now in the last year and a half or so. Their latest issue, one of the late issues of the journal is shown there on the right. And Bill actually contributed a one-page article to this journal just to congratulate them on their 50th anniversary for their organization. It's very exciting at this point because they're in the process of building a new building under construction, which is, I think, a 4-story research building and office for this organization. That those pictures are from a year ago, and I couldn't get any recent pictures that I think it must already have the framework and stuff up. And so they are really moving forward and investing some money that I'm not quite sure where it comes from, but nevertheless, this organization is probably the most active in Japan. Psi Institute of Japan and Japan Psychic Science Association. These are organizations that I was able to find. The one on the left there, the Psi Institute, has published annually since 1976 and show an interest in all classical psi phenomena. The one on the right there is a little bit more of a outreach program where they have workshops and courses offered, whereas the one on the left is maybe more focused academically. This Psychic Science Association is officially formed in 2012, so it's more recent. There's something called the Subtle Energy Association of Japan, established in 1995. I wasn't aware of this until I started researching for this presentation. They study on the nature and consciousness and the energy that connects to the universe and all life. It's kind of a society of intellectualism and spiritualism, and they don't seem to be publishing journals since 2016, but they are still a existing organization. There is a Parapsychology Association in Japan that's publishes twice a year, was established in 1968. But again, this organization, the website seemed quite old, and it didn't seem like it was updated. But when talking with Dr. Yamamoto, he says that he still has some affiliations and work with this organization, so it still does exist, although at what level of activity, I'm not sure. I found something called the Society for Mind-Body Science since 1991, formed to address anxiety, moral decline, psychological crisis in modern life, combines approaches and ideas encompassing modern science with traditional practices like Qi and Feng Shui and Zen, and it's an exploration of spirituality and consciousness. And they have a academic journal and a magazine, similar to like the SSE in that respect. There's a transpersonal society, which has similar sort of goals and ideas, I believe, and has outreach sort of workshops and seminars and webinars, and also a publication. And now if we think about sort of medical, let me close this light to start to come through here, the window in the morning. The alternative and complementary and traditional medicine in Japan is widely practiced, like it is in China. And there's this Japanese Association for Alternative, Complementary, and Traditional Medicine, and I found a Japanese Society for Oriental Medicine. And that first one up top is kind of a public service where if you're looking for something, you can go to that website and you can find doctors and clinics that support this. The one on the bottom, society, is more of an academic society that has meetings and conferences that are investigating and studying kind of these kinds of alternative and complementary medicine. So this is called Kampo in Japan. And it's sort of traditional Chinese style medicine that was introduced early in Japan's history around the time that first formed as a nation state in the 7th century, but it has been adapted over time and modified to suit Japanese culture. Interestingly, there's over 148 Kampo formulations that are covered by the national health insurance here in Japan. So you can get treatment in these alternative medicines, and that does fall within Japanese national healthcare. Part of this kind of traditional medicine is, of course, Reiki, which I think is uniquely Japanese. And there's a nonprofit holistic Reiki organization that aims to contribute to society and health by spreading this through volunteer activities and healing. And there's an international center for Reiki training. And then there's lots of private clinics around Japan. I put that one name down there, Life Forces, because they're just one of many private clinics that practice Reiki and acupuncture and many types of alternative medicine. But we did have a speaker in our Japan SSE event, our 10th event that we had here in Japan, from the Life Forces Institute, and I'll just show you some pictures of that in a moment. So sort of medical organizations and alternative medicine is clearly prevalent here. Okay, let's shift a little bit and talk about our organization. That's my little adaptation of the logo that Annalisa has created. Hope she's not too upset about that. Okay, so the first thing is that this organization, when I decided to start this, I kind of reached out to all of my friends and colleagues that I thought might be interested. And from that, I came up with about 20 people that said, yeah, that's kind of cool. I mean, I'd like to talk about that. I'm interested in that. And then one of those persons in that organization basically says, well, have you ever heard of Meetup? And if you put this on Meetup, you'll find a lot of other people that are interested. So this Meetup organization is an international sort of social networking site. And you can go in there and you create a special group. And I called it the Society for Scientific Exploration, SSE Japan. And you describe what that is and what you want to accomplish and how often you want to meet, and just put a description there. And anybody that is a member will go through various search terms when they sign up and say, oh, I'm in hundreds of search terms. I'm interested in this, and they just make check marks. So anytime there's a new group that comes online, if it hits one of your check marks, you're given a notice. So through this, basically, I have now currently 47 members through the Meetup organization. So in total, there's maybe 68 members that have expressed an interest in the organization, that are on my communication list, on my email list mostly, and I can contact them through Meetup directly. When we have meetings, of course, we don't get 68 people coming to our meetings. In fact, mostly we're getting somewhere between 10 to 15 to 20 that maybe show up for any meetings that we have. We hold our meetings at this National Institute of Informatics. So I may be the sole SSE organizer or the person really in charge of this, but Frederick here gets a lot of credit because he has volunteered use of their institute and gets us space for free and access almost any time we want it. And it's right in central Tokyo. And in fact, it's very close to the Imperial Palace right there, basically in the middle of the screen there. So Frederick's been very helpful in getting this organized. So prior events we held about 10 Meetup events up until the beginning of about last year. And these have ranged from just us as participants talking about various topics like anomalous personal experiences, paranormal research, ghostly phenomena, mind-body debate. I basically announce a topic in advance, say this is what we're going to talk about. I'll lead the discussion. Find something that's of interest to you, that you know about this, that you experienced, do a little research, watch a YouTube video, and then let's just get together and just discuss it from sort of an SSE perspective of a scientific exploration perspective. And so most of what we've done has been that kind of a social interaction. There are scientists that participate in this organization. A lot of computer scientists. About half of them are Japanese, half are foreigners. We're mostly holding English. This is an English sort of group. A lot of bilingual people, of course. And so it's been very nice, fruitful conversations. I've also had a few guests. I mean, we had some guests from like Emoto's work on the water crystals. I had some complementary and alternative medicine exploration with a couple of different guests, and then some multiple sensorial media, multimedia kind of discussions. So it's been a variety of different things. We haven't done anything since COVID sort of hit, though, as a get together, basically. Our last event was kind of the most fun, I think. We had these speakers, which were Chris Earnshaw, who's sort of got himself involved in biomagnetic therapy, and talked all about sort of that concept and his experiences with that. And I think he was really excited about the successful treatments he's had with muscular dystrophy or some kinds of muscular disabilities, and I'm sorry, I'm blanking on exactly, but he was very excited about this, and he was kind of shifting his career more over to practicing this more fully, full time. Life Forces Organization, they were there to talk about their alternative medicine and clinic that they have. And usually with these meetings, we get together, we maybe have some presentations, some discussion, and then we head down the street to this Nepalese restaurant and have a little social hour with dinner and drinks. Occasionally, we've had some just pure social meetings, and I thought this was kind of a cool place that's on this next slide. There's a place in Tokyo called Science Bar Incubator. And this basically is a bar, and they serve all your drinks and food with forceps and in petri plates, and drinks and flasks and beakers and different ways of concoctions of mixing things and filtering things. It's hilarious, and it's very entertaining. I very much enjoy visiting this place. And this guy who's the owner and proprietor is a professor at some local university, and this is his hobby on the side. And then there's other interesting meetup groups that people that are in my group also belong to some other groups. For instance, this Tokyo ET Contact Group, which is involved in CE5 activities. And we have an event actually next week that I'm planning on participating in. There's a Tokyo Space event, and this has actually got people involved, and we have a lot of speakers coming, professionals to speak about astronomy, and they come from NASA or JAXA or other organizations that are very interesting, mostly very science oriented. And then one's more around AI and tech industry and things like that. So a lot of interesting meetup groups that some people in our organization are also part of. Okay, so the other thing that in this last year I got involved with is helping Bill Bengston with a research project that we started here in Tokyo. So when I met Bill 2 years ago, back in the SSE meeting in Colorado area, he mentioned to me some of the difficulties he had with sort of doing some animal research in the States, because sometimes because of the guidelines around euthanasia and cruelty to animals, and universities not being willing to risk any sort of bad publicity, and the kind of work that may need to be done in these experiments may be a survival study, which means you basically want the animals to live or die, essentially, in the long run. And that kind of work isn't done very frequently anymore. And so we were wondering about what it was like in Japan. Now, interestingly, in Japan, they have the same animal research guidelines that they have in the States. But in Japan, there's not the concern about animal rights activists and bad publicity and things like that. And I think, and this sort of goes to sort of a Japanese thinking and philosophy again, where I kind of feel there's sort of, in Japan, there's Right and wrong are extremes, but most of it's gray area in the middle, which is different than rules and regulations. Rules and regulations are black and white. That's the rule, that's the law, you obey it. But right and wrong is very gray. And that guidelines are really not rules, they're guidelines. And so in Japan, what we found out was, yes, those are the guidelines, but if you have a good reason to want to stretch beyond those guidelines, well, if you can justify that, okay, then it's all right. And so we contracted with the Tokyo University of Agriculture and Technology, which is the best, veterinary institute in Japan. Professors shown down here at the bottom, Dr. Matsuda and Tanaka, are the ones running this project. And we're working with 3 different cancer cell lines, 3 different strains of mice, and working with the Bengtson healing method with digital recorded sounds to test that on the tumor formation in these mice. So that publication listed up there is a research that is being sort of expanded in this follow-up study, employing this healing method using digitally recorded information. And there's some pictures of the mice right there getting some audio treatment. So this is currently underway, and the first half of the experiment is being done right now. And so we're weekly monitoring this and working with this organization. Okay, so we've got this activity, research activity going on now in Japan, which is quite exciting. Now, just looking ahead, post-pandemic, what's the plans? Well, I'm continuing to provide email updates to Japan members regarding news, journal, magazine releases, and other information about the SSE to try to keep interest in the group alive. But the big question is, when do we restart meetups? We're in a lockdown right now. There's about 5,000 cases a day, which is on a peak right now of COVID. So it's kind of a issue right now. Eventually, I'm sure we'll get back together, but right now, at the moment, that still doesn't look likely. There's some interesting speakers that I think I have lined up in the future. That one author I mentioned earlier, Carl Becker, who's sort of involved in medical ethics, spiritual care for the dying, near-death studies, things like that. He's been in Japan more than 40 years. He's an American. Pechelo, who we wanted to do more in complementary and alternative healing technologies. Mark Kaprosky, who's the leader of the ET Contact Group. I'd like to have him come and talk about CE5 global activities and the disclosure sort of thing that's got everybody excited about in the States. What are they going to release? What's coming down the pipe in terms of information? And then there's this researcher at Tokyo University who I found recently did some interesting work with magnetic field influence on cell biology. And this is highly related to sort of 5G communications and what's really the story with 5G and what kind of an effect does that have. So that's something I want to do in the future as well. I want to cultivate sort of a SSE global relationship with the new International Research Institute in Chiba, because they're really interested in building some more closely with the SSE. And then finally, I have a new hobby, astrophotography. I've been out most of the night last night, so I may actually form a new meetup group in astrophotography. So basically, that's what I had to present. That's what's going on here, and I think that's how it sort of fits together. And I hope this made some sense and was interest to you guys.
So I will start with a question. Let's see here. Well, this comes from the SSE president, Bill Benston. He says, do Japanese scientists view anomalies differently than their Western counterparts?
Well, I think what I've tried to communicate is I think they're more open to the possibilities that they exist and the concept of them being anomalous, and that's okay. I don't have to dismiss it as being outside of the box. But do they view it differently? I actually don't know. I know, Bill, that you've seen with me as we've talked with the professors at University of Tokyo that, as we describe what we're doing and the tools we're using and what we expect to happen, these very mainstream professional scientists, they snicker and they enjoy talking about it, but they're really fascinated with trying it and just to see, all right, we can deal with that. So I don't have an answer if they view it differently. But they're, I think, more accepting of it here.
Are you aware, this is from John Alexander, are you aware of the Japanese presentations presented at our meeting in Southern California? I believe it was 1995. They demonstrated applications of key that were truly dramatic.
No, I mean, honestly, I really just sort of getting involved with sort of this kind of edge science stuff in the last 4 or 5 years. So before that, it's just a complete black box to me. Yeah.
Marilyn Schlitz asks, she's asking, what about the, I can't pronounce this, Goy Peace Foundation? She said she's collaborated with them over the years.
I'm looking for that. Goy Peace?
GOI Peace Foundation. Are you familiar with them?
No, I'm not at all. I have collaborated with them over the years. Also, Will Brand and I published the first study of Reiki healing many years ago. No, unfortunately, I'm not. But I'll put that on my list of organizations to just take a look at what they're up to. I don't know them.
Yeah, something to check out, perhaps.
I will say one thing though is that I scanned the internet and talked with Professor or Dr. Yamamoto and cross-referenced website listings and found a bunch of organizations, but I don't really have interaction with those organizations. It's hard for me to interact with them unless I actually attend a meeting and meet people face to face, and obviously not a lot of that has occurred in the last year and a half.
Dachin asks, there have been a few Psi-gifted people from China living in Japan. Do you know if they are still involved in research with ISILS?
So, they're certainly not at the ISLI Institute itself. I haven't met any Chinese scientists at that institute. Although that, interestingly, they are expanding that, and he's actually recruiting and will be hiring an increased staff when that new building is built. Whether or not there's an affiliation with some Chinese scientists here in Japan that have affiliated with ISLI, I'm not aware of that. It could be, but I'm sorry, I don't have any information on that. I have not seen any publications in the ISLI journal, though, with Chinese scientists recently, so that at least within the last 2 years or longer.
Along those lines, Glenn Ryan asks, are any of the societies with journals attached, do they accept articles in English?
Only ISLI, as far as I know. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I've only, I know they're all published in Japanese. Now, if you submitted an article to them in English because you were interested in publishing in their journal, I bet they would be quite receptive to it. But they don't routinely publish in English. Yeah.
All right. Let's see, I answered that one. Dachin also asks, can you post the information in the paper that you just mentioned, the one on magnetic fields?
I'll have to dig that up. Yeah, I can find that. I think I have your contact information, Dao-Ching, so I will send that to you.
And Deborah's asking, could you expand on that study?
Oh boy.
The easy questions today.
Yeah, so basically they're cell biologists, and they were this was an in vitro experiment where they were growing. I think it was just HeLa cells, some basic mammalian cell type, and exposing them to various degrees of frequencies of electromagnetic radiation. I'm trying to remember what kind of measurement they were taking. I'm sorry, I'm kind of blanking on it now. This was a year and a half ago when I saw this, and I didn't really follow up on it. But I can send you the link to that. I saw it actually in some kind of on some website that led me back when I noticed it was at University of Tokyo, and I've always wanted to contact that person. So my plans are, I haven't really contacted them yet, to follow up. And if you send me your email or contact me somehow, then I'd be happy to sort of pass along that paper reference.
So that question was from Deborah. So Deborah, if you need to get in touch with Paul, just send me an email. You know where to find me. And we have one final question, at least for the moment. Sheila Dugan asks, can anyone from anywhere join? Is there an SSE Japan online group?
No, we haven't really done that online group. I didn't feel comfortable sort of doing this online, even with COVID hit, and I've kind of felt sort of the face-to-face interaction in the same room was good, was really conducive to get people to really participate. And part of that, I think, is because it's kind of cross-cultural and cross-language. And, if you're in the same room with someone whose English is a second, not their first language, it's much easier to sort of get them to participate and to discuss. And but just to do it online, it just, to me, it doesn't seem to make sense. So unfortunately, we have not done that.
Well, hopefully we'll get to see you resume your activities very soon.
I hope so, yeah.
Yeah. Well, that is it for our questions. So thank you for joining us and giving us the briefing on your group. Very exciting what you've been doing. And like I said, I hope we get to see more of it very soon.